Good evening. On behalf of the Monona Grove School Board, I'd like to welcome everyone to the open portion of our session. We're looking for a motion to reconvene into open session.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay.
All those opposed? All right, we are now in session. I wanted to make a quick note that it's April, and for me that means it's Poetry Month, and I was going to read a poem because this is my last opportunity. You're going to be glad to know I couldn't choose one.
How many lunch is that?
There's a mess on my desk at home right now. I was leaning towards Captain My Captain, but that's about dead Lincoln, so we're just not gonna go there. Anyway, happy April, and off we go. All right, so we've had a declaration of public notice. Thank you. Do we have any recommendations for a change in the order of business tonight?
Yeah, I think it would be appropriate, considering the proud to move the instructional materials complaint appeal up to, say, immediately after the correspondence and the announcements and before the administrative reports.
That's acceptable to me.
So once again, that's a recommendation to move item 2 under section L to just after the administrative reports.
No, before administrative
Before
reports.
administrative reports. Thank you. I hear 2 voices saying that's okay. Anyone else?
Fine with me.
All right, let's make that change. Just one moment, thank you. Thank you. We do have public appearances tonight. I'll take them in the order that I have them in front of me. A reminder that they are to be 3 minutes long, and when you come forward, if you would please give us your name and address for the record. All right, thank you. So I have in front of me Bablu Carter. Thank you. And you will be speaking about the book. Thank you.
Yeah, please take a seat at the.
Thank you.
So I'm Bablu Carter, 406 Acewood Boulevard, Madison, Wisconsin, 53714. And I'm the third of Madison Poet Laureate, so a poem is always appropriate. So I wrote about the book in my column because I've had experience being from Memphis, Tennessee, and also having lived in Madison, Wisconsin for the past 35 years, about the book from many different perspectives. One, as a student who was required to read such books in all-white environments, which was very difficult as a child trying to interpret what was considered great literature, but was very denigrating to me as a person, especially as an African American. Since then, I look at literature as both a scholar and a practicing poet. And so for these reasons, whereas I'm not saying that the book should ever be banned, I am saying that the book should not be required reading for 9th graders in the school district.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next, we have Keisha Peters also speaking about the book.
Again, my name is Keisha Peters, and I live at 500 Galway Terrace, Cottage Grove, Wisconsin, 53527. So forgive me, I'm not used to doing public speaking, so not the best at it. So I've been a resident of Cottage Grove for 2 decades. I've raised 4 biracial children, Cottage Grove. I've been a coach, referee, and many other aspects in the community. I'm also a church member in that community, and been so for 2 decades as well. The reason why I'm here is I find, after reading the book and watching the movie, I feel that the N-word is very offensive. Obviously, I think everybody understands that, but I think that to bring that forward, I mean, growing up, hearing that word, being called that word, brings back a lot of negative memories and a lot of difficult times. I also have 2 children who've gone through the Cottage Grove school system, and one of which had been called that name quite often. So I am for ending any book that has that word in it, because I think it's truly offensive. It's not educational. I think this book in particular is outdated. It's no longer relevant. And in several other states I found they banned the book. So I am in favor of banning the book completely. That would be my take on it. At the very least, I would say the book should be optional for reading, but not mandatory. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's what someone corrected.
Our next person is Janine Comida.
Janine Comida, 402 Dublin Circle, Cottage Grove, 53527. Do you know the real reason why To Kill a Mockingbird is in so many curriculums in the schools? It has nothing to do with it being a Pulitzer Prize-winning book. It's because it was published in 1962, when Penguin Books and all the other publishers started to do mass publications in paperback. So it became very affordable for schools, and that's really how it got in there. The sad part is, schools have failed to maintain a relevant curriculum and have not replaced it in the 5 decades since. We have already provided you with the technical reasons why it should be removed from your curriculum. It violates the very policies you as the school board have approved to govern our school district. So today, I'm going to focus on the core educational reasons why it should be removed and how removing it will allow the district to begin taking steps to providing a relevant and all-inclusive curriculum that benefits all students in Monona Grove. Removing To Kill a Mockingbird from the English 9 curriculum is the small first step to reducing the predominantly white-only curriculum that's currently being delivered. And by replacing it with a book by a minority author, the district can bring another perspective and voice to the curriculum and a broader knowledge base to all of our students. If you truly want students to develop empathy and you truly want to educate all students in this district, then you need to educate all of them about what really happened in history and expose them to the voices of a diverse set of authors with very different perspectives. For decades, you've taught mainly a white-only curriculum, so it doesn't surprise me and shouldn't surprise any educator that there's an achievement gap. Education 101, every teacher learns that in order for students to be successful in their learning, they need to make connections to the material. They must relate to what is taught. They must relate what is taught to prior knowledge or a prior experience. And if you do not provide or use materials that students can connect with, they will not be able to achieve a synthesis level of knowledge. Therefore, a predominantly white curriculum leaves non-white students at a disadvantage from the beginning of their schooling all the way through graduation, thus causing the achievement gap to continue to grow each year. So today I'm coming here to encourage you to make the right decision, the decision to make a change to the curriculum so that the district can take that first step towards providing an education for all students in our student body. A chance to introduce a new voice and a new perspective to the students so that as a district, you can make progress towards your district strategic goal of guaranteeing equity for all students. So begin that journey by making the decision to remove To Kill a Mockingbird and replace it with the voice and perspective of a minority author.
Thank you. Our next person is, I hope I do this right, Keisha Peters.
I'm Keisha Peters, 500 Galway Terrace, Cottage Grove. I've obviously agreed with what everybody else has said so far. I just wanted to add a few extra things. Just the book itself, along with just the overuse of the N-word, it also has a couple other dialogues that are troubling. Atticus responds to his daughter's question about what an N-lover means, and he states that it's a term that don't mean anything. Also, which is implying that words don't carry power. And as my husband mentioned, and mothers and fathers get different stories and hear different things, we actually had 2 children who've already finished the district and 1 that's still in it, and 2 out of the 3 have been called the N-word on multiple occasions. One of them was recorded at a football game by the kid that was recording the football game as my son ran with the ball. So, words do carry a lot of power. My son was called the N-word, my youngest son, at the park and by his classmates, and he didn't want to go to the park anymore. So that word carries a huge stigma and a huge power even today. The second was a part about the KKK, and it was made light when Atticus was asked by his son about what the KKK was, and he answers about, well, they couldn't scare anybody, like they were not that threatening. And I'm just like, really? That's what we want our kids to hear and read about? Because that was not the case. I think that we need to teach with books written by people of color about their experiences, not by a white woman trying to emulate what the experience is. A man could never describe the fear a woman feels when she's walking into a dark alley at 3 o'clock in the morning or a parking garage, because that's something that's different. They don't have that same fear. A woman has to fear of being, raped. We would not have, our children reading a book about a rape victim written by a man and then having derogatory terms being called to her because, what she was wearing. So I don't feel that we need to have this book in our curriculum as required reading. I had a lot of other things to say, but I know we have a lot of people to talk, so I think I'll just end with that. So I just ask, that we all work together. We're, you're elected officials to represent us, and that's for everybody and all children, not just, white children. So, thank you.
Thank you. Jane?
Good evening. My name is Jim Ahern. I live at 405 Coyle Parkway in Cottage Grove, Wisconsin. I have some prepared remarks. Thank you. I'd like to begin by thanking you for your selfless service to our community and continued commitment to our children. My wife and I are pleased that you're taking this appeal before you seriously. The appeal regarding the removal of a book known as a classic in American literature is a difficult issue for you to consider. We have struggled ourselves with a number of factors in this debate, including our own district's code of conduct and harassment policies, the state Common Core standards, and the idea of censorship. My wife and I have come to recognize that we perceive these factors through prejudice, having only a white person's perspective. Based on our experiences and socialization, we only see the world through a white lens. If I were to use the N-word and it offends you, I ask you to empathize with a 9th grade African American kid who hears it read aloud in class. We often talk about racial equity and injustices, yet rarely do we as a society take specific steps to change things. Removing this book from the English 9 and English 9 honors curriculum is just a small step towards true change, yet it has the power to make a big statement. Our family is unique in that we are white parents with adopted black children. We are teaching our children about the N-word and other forms of racism because they will face it. I spoke with my 9-year-old son last night about what I would say this evening. And he asked that we, as white people, think about what it would feel like if our ancestors were the slaves and the roles were reversed. As you can see, I get pretty emotional about how my 9-year-old son feels about this issue. My wife and I strongly believe schools should be teaching about how America was indeed built on slavery, how racism persists, but more importantly, a positive narrative around African Americans. Certainly not all white families are having these same conversations with their children, and too often, The first time a white child will hear the word nigger will be on the school playground or in a piece of quote-unquote American literature. By the way, did this offend you? How did it make you feel? Should our African-American kids just toughen up? In our brief introduction to the high school curriculum, we believe that these discussions do belong in a class where an instructor is trained in culturally responsible practices. My understanding is that the education and training is part of the review committee's recommendation, and we think that's great. Perhaps at some point in the future, we'll have the good fortune of an English class capable of incorporating this conversation appropriately. However, we believe that our school district is just not there yet. In summary, you have the power to take a small step and use it as a platform for greater change. There are plenty of other books that could be used to achieve our curriculum objectives. And it's simply just not necessary to continue to use To Kill a Mockingbird. It has served its time in our schools, and we need to replace it. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next person is Sierra Autumn.
Just opinion, but not.
Did you want to speak, or
It
did she
said
just
speak.
register?
It does say speak on the
Okay.
paper. Yep. Our next person is Michelle, is it Ruda?
Yep.
Thank you.
Michelle Ruda, 100 Coyle Parkway, Cottage Grove. I have 3 boys in the school district. And first of all, I'd like to start out saying that we are huge supporters of all of you and the school district. Every referendum that comes across, my husband and I are huge supporters. And frankly, my main answer on the questionnaire that's on my desk right now regarding the facilities input that the district is looking for is, my answer is going to be, I trust what the board, what the committee, what the teachers want, and what they think is best. I'm here to talk about the book, obviously, and this is a different topic. This is where we disagree, or could disagree. We all have our own prejudgments about the book. I myself, admittedly, when I heard about the Comidas bringing the topic at hand, I was like, oh my gosh, there's too many things to worry about. What are we worrying about this for? And I had my own feeling about the book because I've read it. 30 whatever years ago, I read it, and it was fine. It's fine. Now, when I think about it, the word nigger used 48 times in 2018. I don't get it. I just don't get it as required reading for a high schooler. That logically in my heart does not sit right. So why would I support my children saying, it's okay for you to read the word nigger 48 times? So I can't support that. And I'm asking you to please withdraw it from the required curriculum for high school students. I support having it in the library, it's a classic, but then it turns into something that's not required. See, I'm nervous, can't even bring up that word. So as a white person, I will never know what it's like to be called a nigger or any other racial slur where I'm in the minority of that race. My entire life I've been in the majority. I will never know what it's like to be in the shoes of a racial minority. But I can assure you, the 15% of our students who are racial minorities in our school district, every single one of them know. My first grader knows. My third grader knows. My fourth grader knows what it's like to be a racial minority. I don't support them having to read this in 9th grade. Thank you.
Thank you.
He's not coming. You're gonna sit in and stay.
Our next person is Yama Comida.
Yama Comida, 402 Dublin Circle, Cottage Grove. Over the last several months, we've received threats and hate mail. We've been told to go back to Africa. We were told that the majority rules and minorities are supposed to just accept how things are. As a community, we can do better for everyone. Doing something the same way just because we've always done it that way is unacceptable. The community expects change. We as parents are here to extend a helping hand to the Monona Grove School District. We are here today to say we are part of this community and our voices matter. Our children matter. We are in this for the long haul and our engagement will stay strong. Our children deserve a curriculum that is geared towards all of human society, not just the narrow perspectives of one group. Provide equitable alternatives that portray the image of Black people with the true humanity we all share. Help our children establish genuine bonds with characters of color. The subtle, covert undercurrent of racism and privilege in Dane County is by design. Recognize and correct the imbalance of power that is perpetuated by dominance and persecution of the minority. We are asking for the district to take its own strategic plan seriously. The district states that faculty and administration will build their understanding and confront inequities, but our children receive harsher punishments. They are steered away from courses that will make a difference in their lives. As shown in the district's own data, implicit systemic biases towards children of color are not recognized and acted upon. When parents point out systemic biases, the district digs in deeper to protect the status quo. We are here to say, work with us. We are not asking that you ban this book. We are here to say, as a first step towards equity, recognize the power imbalance that you are perpetuating. Do the right thing and raise the voices of people of color. Model success by people of color in your curriculum. Remove To Kill a Mockingbird from the curriculum and work hand in hand with us so that we may start with earnest to reduce the racial disparities in the Monona Grove School District. We have a shared responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next person is Kelly Sullivan.
I clocked it in at 3:13, so I need to read this. Sorry, I'll be speed reading. Kelly Sullivan, my address is 567 Sherrywood, Oregon, Wisconsin. This is my 18th year in this district. When I began, students in 10th grade studied To Kill a Mockingbird, but when we shifted our English 10 course to include more world literature titles, we moved TKM to our English 9 curriculum in 2008 after a few years of trying different whole class titles that we didn't feel were good choices for students for a variety of reasons. TKM is an excellent fit for our theme of identity that we study in English 9 throughout the entire school year. One aspect of To Kill a Mockingbird that is in the novel allows us to explore several aspects of identity, not just race. We also look at religion, gender, age, social class, family, etc. We have not yet found another title we think would be appropriate to use for students at this level. While this removal request is based on racial diversity, we as educators have to look beyond race and consider other aspects of identity the characters have. And we ask students to consider the intersectionality of characters who struggle with more than one factor that can be used to marginalize them. One of the comments recorded in the media suggested that only the social studies teachers should teach about racism, but in my work with Create, Beyond Diversity, Restorative Justice, and the White Privilege Conference have all taught me that all subject areas need to be developing curricula that provide students an awareness of social justice issues. In fact, it's our responsibility to do so. The teachers in our department have worked tirelessly over the last several years to make major changes to core titles to include more authors of color and different cultures throughout our 9-12 curriculum. And we've worked hard to create spaces in our classroom to explore storytelling of history and how those relate to our social issues today. We use the teaching tolerance framework to help our students develop stronger critical thinking skills, especially around the areas of social justice. And there is a challenge of using the N-word. Before we even begin reading the novel, we discuss culture around the word and its use. We look at Ta-Nehisi Coates' video clip and or an essay by Gloria Naylor about the meanings and use of the word. As educators, our job is to help students navigate the challenges of harmful words in society today, and the N-word is not the only difficult or harmful word our students encounter in the literature we study. As a classroom community, we discuss and sometimes teachers express how we will deal with the word when discussing specific passages or texts. Another challenge to the text is that the novel is a white savior story in studying Atticus, which is true, but many stories in American culture are white savior stories. Why is that? TKM allows us the opportunity to look at media, film, and stories today and talk about the influence of those stories have on our American understanding, while also looking at the limited opportunities for people of color and women to create literature or films that show stories featuring non-white characters or women in lead roles. TKM is a novel that allows us to examine our past and make connections between the events of the time period's novel setting to help students understand racism in our society today. Tamir Rice, Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, how do we help students understand why court decisions like these happen today in our society if we don't give students an opportunity to explore the past? How do we help students understand why events like Charlottesville happen if we don't teach about the events from our past that shaped it? How do we help our students understand why Black Lives Matter if students don't understand the events that led to its necessity today in fighting against injustice? Not all literature we teach makes all students comfortable, and often it's in this space of discomfort where students can grow and learn from examining their own personal experiences. Removing TKM does not guarantee that we'll find a book that will replace it, that will offer the richness of the experience students have reading To Kill a Mockingbird currently. In fact, we will face great difficulty in doing so because we examine this novel in our teaching every year. I encourage you to uphold the decision of the review committee.
Thank you. Our next person is, I hope I get this, Hugh, is it Council?
Yes.
Council? Okay, thank you.
My name is Hugh Council. I live at 1405 Baskerville Avenue, Monona, Wisconsin. So, I don't have anything pre-written, but I just wanted to offer my viewpoint as a student at Monona Grove. Currently, I am a senior, and I read To Kill a Mockingbird during my 9th grade year. And before today, I was strongly about agreeing to it because of keeping in the curriculum, because of the fact that I feel as though it's a very interesting book. I thought it was a very interesting book, and it used to be my favorite book, to be honest. But like it said in the complaint, where it seems that we become numb to the N-word, I do actually believe that in some sense. I didn't believe that at first. I thought that I still feel uncomfortable when that word is told. But still at the same time, the N-word, if I did not take that away from the book and its power and its caring, then I feel as though I didn't learn the book correctly. If the book were to be kept in the curriculum as requirement, it does need to be taught by a person who can tell me in the correct ways and help me really interpret how oppressed African Americans feel. Because I cannot say that. I am a white man who was grown up in a very nice town, and I have not had any issues with anything. I feel as though no race issues have come to me. My mother is half Mexican, but I have not experienced the same things that she has. I'm 6'5", she's 5'1". I have white genes, I will be 100% honest. But I feel as though something does need to be taught that does carry that significance. The reason why I did appreciate the book because of the N-word being stated was because of the fact that I feel as though I needed to experience something like that in 9th grade. I needed to step up from middle school, and I really needed to experience the real world and get an understanding of the discrimination that's out there. I feel as though I can't go into the world just after high school not knowing what the N-word does stand for and the power that it does have behind it. Now, the thing is, too, is that I can say that it might not have resonated with a lot of my classmates. There's a thing called Spark Notes, and a lot of people use it. I can say that I used it today, actually, to make sure I could touch up on To Kill a Mockingbird. I do appreciate lessons that do come from literature, but I do also understand the idea that the N-word is used 48 times and how terrible it is. I didn't understand that before I read the complaint and the appeal. I actually enjoyed reading them both. But I definitely believe that if it is still part of the curriculum in some way, it should definitely be optional. It should really be optional. I think it should still be available in our libraries at school. But I really do understand how offensive it is. with that said, thank you all for being as great as you are as MG school board. I just voted for the first time, so that's pretty cool. But otherwise, I mean, I really do appreciate it, and I'm happy to talk here and give a perspective as an MG student. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next person is Shannon Anderson.
My name is Shannon Anderson, 6306 Ford Street here in Monona. I'm a resident of Monona and have been a taxpaying homeowner here for 10 years. Tonight I'm here to voice my support for the removal of To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee from the English curriculum within our district. I've come to this conclusion after listening to the African American parents within the district who are advocating for removal. I understand the concerns about censorship and what it means to remove a book from a curriculum, but I still believe that removal is the right decision. While this book does hold some lessons on racism and the Jim Crow South, it completely centers on white characters and white perspectives. It does not portray African Americans with any agency or control throughout the story, which is a large problem. I also believe we must now read To Kill a Mockingbird within the context of Ghost at a Watchman, which reveals that Atticus Finch is a blatant racist. How can he teach us about racism when we now know he's no better than the angry white community members of Macomb, Alabama? It is my understanding that there are little to no authors of color within the curriculum of Monona Grove High School. I'm of the opinion that while this book has imparted important classroom discussions about the Jim Crow South and racism, they are lacking because the book is told from the white perspective alone. To me, it seems if we are going to try to teach and discuss the legacy of racism that's in the foundations of our society, surely we should be using books written by individuals who are more intimately acquainted with the experience, which are African American authors. Their lived experience far outweighs a white author's attempt at description. I know as a woman, I feel frustrated when a male author tries to impart my perspective or my experience. Whenever that occurs, it is limited by the fact that he has never experienced what it is like to move through the world as a woman. It is better for him to elevate my voice and my story because I am the expert. The same goes here. I'm unable to fully understand what it's like living under the constant threat of racism, and I don't believe Harper Lee was able to fully understand what it was like to live under the laws of the Jim Crow South. I'm not saying the book has no value, it's just that text is an inadequate vehicle for these lessons. In closing, I have a short list of books that would be excellent replacements for To Kill a Mockingbird. Their Eyes Are Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston, Black Boy by Richard Wright, Freshwater Road by Denise Nicholas, A Lesson Before Dying by Ernest J. Gaines, Monster by Walter Dean Myers, and The Mighty Miss Malone by Christopher Paul Curtis, which actually, the protagonist is a young African-American girl who's the same age as Scout, and it happens in the same time period as To Kill Mockingbirds. Would be a great way to help impart both the gender and also racial lessons that we're trying to teach our children. All of these are written by African-American authors, and all are better to convey the experience of African-Americans living in the U.S. during that time and also now. They are the experts of their experience in history. Let us listen and learn from them. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next person is Tanya Cam.
Sorry, you should turn my back to you all. I was so weird about that. So my name is Tanya Cam. I live at 5514 Schluter Road here in Monona. I'm an associate professor of English literature at UW-Whitewater. I teach, among other classes, U.S. multicultural literature, and my dissertation was on memoirs by women of color. I just want to say, like, when I read, don't have a prepared speech, when I read To Kill a Mockingbird, I liked it, you know, a long, long time ago. And I see why it's a classic. But I think that with changing demographics, we have to make room for new classics. And this is a statistic by the U.S. Census Bureau. By the year, you probably know it already, sorry. By the year 2020, so in 2 years, more than half the nation's, the U.S.'s children, and those 18 and under, will be of color or mixed race. More than half in 2 years. So I think that the change in demographics demands a change in curriculum. It seems right to me. I have a few suggestions in terms of what might work. This is a graphic novel, a memoir by John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis, so it's a real person. It's about teaching activism in a peaceful way, so it might connect with a lot of students who participated in the March for Our Lives. The N-word is used. My debate is not so much with the N-word. It is hurtful and painful, and I would not want to be a student of color, any color, in that class where the N-word is being read over and over again. The N-word is used here, but it's in the context of how hurtful it is. Activists, black and white, are being trained by fellow activists to not respond, not get violent when someone calls them the N-word or an N-lover. So it is there. You can have that meaningful conversation still. It's a graphic memoir. I think students would love it. It is rich. It is being taught at multiple universities, including Marquette University. It has won not the Pulitzer Prize, the National Book Award for the third one. It has won the Coretta Scott King Book Award. It has won the John F. Kennedy Book Award and the American Library Association's 2014 award. So it also comes praise. And this is a real person. It's written by a person of color and illustrated by a white person, so you can see connection and unity if you want to read those themes. Did I have one more statistics? Oh, I want to, teachers, I'm a teacher too, are incredibly overworked. It's a lot of material to find a new book. I'm being, asked to look for a new book because it's just not in keeping with, I guess, the vibes of my students. They're younger, they're hipper than I am, and I lose touch sometimes. I honestly do, and when I realize they weren't responding, I have to look for a book, and that meant me reading 4 books over the weekend. But I found something that I think will work. I think even if you did a test run with one teacher, I know it's so expensive to get new books, but new books will be coming. They'll have to change, right? Not just for African American writers and African American students, but for all students of color. I have some other books. The woman who spoke before me, I commend her list. I agree with all of hers. I think Monster would also work well. And I think the teachers would love teaching it once they got used to it. I hate change. It's tough. It's a lot of work, but I think they'd love it because of the students' responses. So that's all I have to say. If you want to look at it, if you want to check my statistics, I have the URLs for my statistics.
Thank you. And I believe we have one more person, Lida Nass. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Lida Nath, and I live at 4424 Oak Court in Monona. I am speaking against the use of the book. As a community with an aim of seeking to improve its diversity awareness and have a welcoming community for all, we must try to understand, number one, how different social groups experience social life, and 2, listen to any complaints and seek understanding. 3, make compromises to strive for most community members to feel comfortable and safe. 4, revise curriculum so authors and or main character voices are from diverse backgrounds are read and understood. And 5, give difficult or material that causes tensions to experts to handle. If a majority group continues to only view a situation from its single perspective, the community does not feel like home for everyone, and steps towards a welcoming community for all is thwarted. I'm in favor of replacing To Kill a Mockingbird or moving it to an optional list or to the social science classes to be studied because I'm in favor of Monona making efforts to serve all community members and consider all community members. And so we can understand the different experiences from different groups in our single city here. So please remove the text from the class or make it optional. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe that concludes our public comment section. Thank you. Thank you to everyone for speaking this evening. All right. We now move to our consent agenda. It currently has the approval of board meeting minutes. We also have staff retirements and resignations. We have a CISA 2 contract for 18-19, and also the approval for a Dane County New Teacher Project contract for 2018-2019.
I move approval of the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. The consent agenda has been approved. Thank you. That then takes us to recognitions this evening.
Okay, I have two that I'd like to begin with. First of all, in the consent agenda you just approved was one teacher retirement. Christine Charleston from Winnequa Elementary teacher is retiring after 31 years in the district. Again, we appreciate her service and dedication. We certainly wish her the best moving forward. And then secondly, we would also like to recognize our outgoing board members, Carrie Robbins and Jennifer Smith. And we actually, in a small token of appreciation, we do have actually they're behind you, you'll present, we won't get up and do that now, but Silver Eagle or Glass Eagles that state on there for your dedication and service to the Monona Grove Board of Education. So thank you both very much for your service.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, at the high school, we called it getting the bird, right? So, just had to share that moment, but thank you. Yes.
And I just wanted to congratulate our music department and all the students who performed in the musical Crazy for You this past weekend. They did an absolutely fabulous job. The choreography was some of the most difficult I've seen our high school kids ever do, and it was pretty amazing.
It was
So
amazing, yes.
Congratulations to all of
Yeah.
them.
All right.
Well, I just add, I mean, it's a huge list of names, but our track teams are doing spectacularly, and one of our students was just featured in the Community Herald for golf and basketball. And then I always love it when they put in those sections about how the kids are doing in their postgraduate education. And we had some nice lists of our kids in there too, so. It's
Thank
fun
you.
to have them make you feel good.
Anything further for recognitions tonight? All right, thank you. That then takes us to correspondence.
Okay, and this probably could have went under recognition as well, but correspondence, you do on your board docs have the official tally of the last Board of Elections. So as we wish our outgoing board members the best and thank them for the service, we also would like to congratulate our new board members that will be joining us. First of all, incumbent Jeff Simpson has been reelected, and then our new board members that will be taking office on April 23rd, Andrew McKinney, who is with us this evening. And Eric Hartz is also here. Okay. So again, congratulations and welcome.
All right. That then takes us to an item for possible action that we had moved up in our agenda, and this is regarding the instructional materials complaint appeal.
And I'll begin just to procedurally, and our board members certainly are aware and they have documentation, but for those present tonight, I'd like to just spend a minute or two to talk about, our Board of Education is governed by not only state statutes, but their board policies. And so our policy dictates, in this case, the process anytime there is a concern or a complaint against regarding instructional materials. And so I'd like to just read through for the record up to this point what has been done as far as processing that complaint, and then the board's role this evening in considering that appeal. Okay, and so originally there was a complaint filed by parents objecting to the To Kill a Mockingbird book as being a required reading in our 9th grade curriculum. Board Policy 9130 governs such complaints, which was followed. That policy requires the director of instruction is referred to that person for review, and includes a provision for assembling a committee in order to consider the complaint. The committee was formed, met 2 times to read the complaint, and the materials were given to read between meetings. Then the committee, when they convened, voted 4-1 to recommend retaining the book in the curriculum, but also with the caveat of a recommendation of further consideration of the place in curriculum, the context in which it is taught, and possible equivalent options for use of the book. And then that was forwarded to me. I supported the committee's recommendation and notified the parents. The parents filed a timely appeal, and then through policy, that appeal now has been forwarded to the Board of Education, where all written materials that were given to the review committee have also been shared with the Board of Education. And then policy 9130 governs that review tonight of the appeal that says the board shall review the matter and invite the individuals in writing of its decision as soon as practicable. And then the discussion at the March 14th board meeting led to consensus in talking about what the matter means and referring to, again, that committee's decision. So without going through the rest of it, the board has the process in which to consider that appeal, and then ultimately for the board to make a decision through the use of a motion following or during discussion.
Susan.
I think it's also important to note that the stated basis for the appeal, it's on item 5 in this outline, was that policy 9130 was not properly executed by the school district, and that 2, the committee failed to perform due diligence and execution of its duties because A, it didn't fully address the objections written in the complaint, or B, follow the criteria outlined in school board policy 9130. So in light of the charge, which is the appeal of the committee's decision and responding to that specific charge, I'm going to start off just to try to clarify the conversation with a motion. I move to confirm the review committee's decision to retain To Kill a Mockingbird in the English curriculum with the recommendation of further consideration by the Monona Grove High School English Department of its place in the curriculum, the context in which the book is taught, and possible equivalent options for use of the book.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a second. That then takes us, we're open for discussion.
And then, I guess
Yes.
I give some of my rationale.
Sure.
I think we all struggled a lot with this. I always cited this book as one of my favorite books. And then this gave me a lot of pause, and on the one hand, I kind of appreciated the academic exercise of reading through all the articles, and it led me to other articles, and it led me to Ta-Nehisi Coates' book and his YouTube videos and his essays and what Danny Glover's writing, various other people's writing. And I thought a lot about it and rereading the book. I'm not quite finished yet, but I'm finding it is on its merit, there is just a lot there. However, our job is really to stick to this appeal, which is of the committee's decision. So to the point that policy 9130 was not properly executed, I would say there wasn't really any evidence in the complaint to support this. I think there was some comments that I felt were based on a misinterpretation of policy, in that the complainants assert that any part of the process on which the policy is silent is a violation. That's not accurate. Silence in a policy does not equate with not allowed or even not appropriate. For example, the inclusion of supplemental materials, and there were articles pro and con, and again, they gave me a lot of pause, and all of your comments and the emails, we haven't gotten a lot, but we've gotten a couple opposed and one very powerful one, two actually powerful ones, one today, in favor of. So we've gotten a few from both sides, and your comments are all very, are powerful as well. So I felt that the inclusion of supplemental materials, which consisted of articles taking positions for and against the merits of the novel, was logical and reasonable. The identification of who would facilitate the committee's work is not spelled out in policy, and the appointment by the superintendent of the director of instruction to fill this role was appropriate. Policy, in fact, notes that wherever the title of superintendent appears in policy, it should be read as superintendent or designate. So the argument that the director of instruction was biased in her selection of committee members is also supported only by opinion, not fact. The argument that committee members were not knowledgeable in the area is again based on judgment of the complainants. The policy requirement is that the lay members of the committee be knowledgeable in that area. One of these individuals is employed by Monona Library and has a background in literature. The other is an African-American parent and also has experience with racism. The area is both quality literature and racism. In fact, all 5 committee members are knowledgeable in that area. Second point, the statement that the committee failed to perform due diligence because it didn't fully address the objections written in the complaint. I feel it did address the objections written in the complaint. The only actual sort of evidence cited for this is based on opinions of the complainants, sometimes based on their interpretations of policy language and their belief that the book as a whole is discriminatory and therefore a violation of policy, which I believe is a matter of opinion. The second point there was that they didn't follow the criteria outlined in the committee didn't follow the criteria outlined in School Board Policy 9130 in their analysis. These criteria were simply to be meant to use to guide thinking. There's no policy requirement that these criteria be the sole consideration. And even given this, I think you could argue about all of those items as well. So therefore, when I consider the grounds, the charge and the grounds on which we are to make this decision about the policy, I conclude that in fact the policy was properly executed. The committee did in fact do its due diligence. I also was able to attend the review committee's meeting and listen to the members' I thought very thoughtful comments. I honestly, from listening, wasn't sure which way they were going to go at the end, because they too talked about how they had liked the book back in the day, but reading it again and reading in the context of reading all these articles. I read all the articles, and Tanya has he quotes his book first, and then the other thing before I started reading the book again, because I kind of wanted to get my head a little bit in a different place. And I could say a lot more about the merits of the book, but I don't think that's what we're here to talk about right now. Although if other people get there, I probably can't help it, because I've just been thinking a lot about this for a long time. But anyway, that's why I made that motion, because I wanted to start us off, and I think try to frame the conversation in what I believe the charge actually is. So.
I'd like to read the policy 9130, just one phrase from it. It says, "The board shall review the matter." It doesn't say we review the appeal process. The review committee's process and make a judgment on their process. It says we review the matter. The policy specifically says that we consider the merits of the question. In my mind, when you say review the matter, you consider the merits of the original question, not simply the process by which the review committee reached their decision. This is a complicated issue, and I apologize for being long-winded and rambling. I try to avoid that. But there's a lot of things that this has been a long and illuminating process for me. And I'm not sure exactly where to start, but I've got a lot of questions and comments to make. And I'm going to start it this way. I was on the airplane the other day, and the flight attendant's name was Atticus. I know 2 women who are named Scout. That speaks to the impact, the importance of this book. But does anybody know anybody named Tom Robinson or Calpurnia? There's a reason for that. I had a discussion, the first thing I had a discussion with my son, who was graduated from this high school and read this book. We were talking about this book, and I came up and I said to him, now imagine you're reading this book as a 9th grade African-American student. What positive role models, what positive characterizations are there in this book for you to identify with? Stop him in his tracks. And you know what? Everybody I've asked that question to, from some of our teachers, some experts, people on the street, it stops them in their tracks. And we have an achievement gap in this school, in this district, something that's been really incalcitrant, something we've had a hard time addressing, achievement gap. And it's part of the problem. The fact that we have in 9th grade, one of the books you read, all of the positive models have the same skin tone as mine, and none of the positive characters, and anyone with a darker skin tone doesn't have a positive characterization. That's an extra burden. That's an extra, sure you can read around it, sure you can teach around it, but it's an extra burden, and it's an extra hurdle, that's the word I'm looking for our African American students that our white students don't have to deal with. They can relate to Scout, they can relate to Atticus, they can be inspired by, I've heard lots of stories about how people have been inspired by Atticus. I think this is a great book. I think everybody should read it. But the question is it the best book for our ninth grade class, for the objectives that we want to meet? And one of those objectives, one of those very important objectives that's in our strategic plan, is to address this issue of the achievement gap. And I wonder if we design a curriculum, well, I won't say it that way, I'll say it this way. We should be erring on the side of getting at that achievement gap, not putting up books that have extra hurdles for our minority students. You know, I've never had anybody aim the N-word at me in a negative way. But that's also, to me, that's not actually my biggest concern in this book. I do understand the concern, and probably I can't relate to it because of the accident of my birth. But again, it's an extra hurdle that we put in front of students who have had that word aimed at them in the most derogatory and hurtful ways. The first thing we ask our African American students is, okay, here's a book, it's got the N-word, get over it so we can go on to these other parts of the lesson. And I'm not sure that that's appropriate. I'm not sure that this is the best choice to get to these lessons. I appreciate other people bringing lists of books. I contacted the at the university, the Children's Center for there's a outfit at the university that evaluates children's books, and they gave me a list very easily of 24 books. And by the way, Monster keeps coming up on everybody's list. I haven't read it. I can't speak to it, but it comes up on everybody's list. I'm not going to say, oh, you should use Monster. I want the professionals in our district to review that and take a look at these options. Some other considerations. I read this book in 8th grade in middle school, and the setting of the Depression era South was to me long ago, far away. Even then, back in the 70s, I couldn't relate to it. If we're trying to teach about social justice in America, to me, it was like, oh, this isn't a problem anymore, because that was something that happened way back then, far away. As we know, sadly, that's not true. If we're going to prepare our students, we're going to teach social justice, and we're going to prepare our students for the world today, I think giving them a social justice program that's based in 1930s America in the South doesn't do the job. Because it didn't do the job for me. And I don't know if I can't see, it's even farther away now. Unfortunately, as someone said to me just yesterday about this, it's surprising how far we haven't come on the issue of race in America. And I think that a contemporary portrayal, given just the recent news, may be more appropriate. We think about this white savior model. At the time this book was written, there were thousands of African Americans facing down bull counters, dogs and clubs, getting arrested at lunch counters, sitting on buses where they shouldn't be. And these people were all heroes and faced the difficulties and challenges much greater than any ahistorical Atticus Finch's did. So why are we using this as a list? Why is the white guy the hero when there would be thousands and thousands of examples if we don't want to talk about the reality of social justice in our curriculum? This isn't about banning a book. This is about, are there better choices for us? And I really think that there are. There is an issue, I do have an issue with the review process. And anybody who's been on this board for a while and knows me knows that I have a very difficult time when it comes to substituting our judgment as a board for the professional judgment of the people in this district. I am very reluctant to do it, and I've stated that over and over again. So when I'm going to do that, I'm going to have to be very careful about the reasons behind that. And I looked at the review process, and I have to say I think it was flawed. And I think it's flawed for a couple of reasons. The most important one, They didn't take public input. We have an obligation, again, it states in our strategic plan that we are going to be engaged regularly and responsive in ongoing two-way communications. This is a community issue. I really believe we should have taken, that the committee should have had the community input in front of it, before it. I've heard what we heard tonight when making that decision. The second thing, the objection I have is I think the standard that they applied was too low. Everybody, and I hear everybody say this when they talk about this book, everybody had, on that committee, expressed serious reservations about this book. Committee members said, well, we have these foundational sort of central texts that we use, that everybody uses, and then they can take the lessons they learn when we're teaching from these texts and apply them to everything else, the books they read on their own, or these books that they read optionally as part of the class. Take these lessons out. Shouldn't these central texts be the most inclusive ones that we can find, rather than texts that put up challenges to some segments of our student population? The other thing that was expressed was that it was also expressed in the committee that, well, part of the solution is if a student objects, they can opt out and get other materials, which actually has happened in a case in front of us today. That's a third of the group discussion in 9th grade. It's not acceptable for these students, who are the ones we're trying hardest to meet, to be opted out.
Yes.
It's not acceptable to me. I don't know necessarily what the solution of this is, but that can't be part of it. It's unacceptable to me that is part of the solution.
Yes.
Okay. Personally, it's unacceptable to me, and I hope that the rest of the board feels that way. I think I have one more comment here. There's a whole bunch of stuff here, which is there's another issue in this book, a central theme in this book. And given right now the news we've had about the Me Too movement, in fact, we've had a recent case where hundreds of women and girls were molested in a situation that went on for decades. And it went on because the women who first reported it were not believed. The central theme of this book is that women who report sexual assault are not to be believed because they're making it up for social reasons. How do we teach around that in this book? I think that's another issue. And in fact, this is an issue that plays out in some of the disciplinary processes that we've seen as a board in this school, come out of the school. And what's part of it? He said, she said. It's another issue. When I look at this, when I look at all of these considerations, when I look at things that have changed since we initially adopted this as part of the curriculum, which is we have an increasing minority population, and our goals have changed. One of those goals being primarily, we want to close the achievement gap. I just believe that there must be better alternatives to this book out there. And I would like to see our district take up that challenge and design a curriculum with that in mind when it comes to 9th grade freshmen.
Can I just,
Thank
point of
you.
order
Yeah.
or clarification?
Yes.
At the last board meeting, when we talked about process,
Yes.
we did talk about what the matter was, and we did talk about what we were going to do, and the question was raised, I know Carrie raised it a few times, are we going to rehear this entire question? Dean asked it, used the term de novo a couple times, and there was a fair amount of agreement among, I thought, the majority of us, that we were not going to do that. That this was going to be a narrow, basically, the complaint is the appeal of the committee's decision, and the complaint itself is entirely based on the comment that the process was not followed. You can argue that the process was flawed because there was no public comment. The policy does not require that. And if we're following our current policy, and the question is, did the committee follow our policy? I'm arguing, yes, they did. And I think I took very seriously something that has not been picked up in the media. The committee did not simply say, keep the book in the curriculum. It said, take it under serious advisement. The recommendation was to continue to review, to have discussions. You know, I have a bunch of papers prepared also, if we're gonna talk about the merits of the book. The fact that the 9th grade class starts out with a unit on race in the very beginning of the year. The fact that this group teaches the Scottsboro trials before they read To Kill a Mockingbird, because To Kill a Mockingbird came out of that. There is a real effort, and because one of the criticisms is how
Point of order.
well, I'm sorry, I'm straight.
If you're
Again, I'm
good.
doing what you did, and I don't mean to do that. I would like to go back to Jennifer and ask for clarification. That was what was in the printed outline that we received from the attorney who was here, and that's what I was taking as our job tonight. So that's what I thought. So Jennifer, would you rule on that,
if
please?
I may have
I'm
one.
sorry, I asked the board president.
Yes, so, the document that you received in board docs was through consultation with our superintendent and our legal counsel in review of the previous discussion that we had at a prior board meeting.
Right.
And so this is our document to guide our work tonight. And so it is the case that we are to review the committee's decision. I think the larger extended conversation certainly will take place, and the board can decide what it wants to do with future proceedings and future policy. But for tonight's proceedings, we are to consider the committee's decision and whether we are to uphold it or not.
All right, well, that said, I'm going to again read policy 9130. The board shall review the matter. I am going to be guided by the policy, and I hope that my other board members do the same.
That was the point, the board discussion of what the matter meant, and that exact question is what we talked about, and we decided that what the matter meant was.
I
we would
reviewed the
review
minutes for the meeting, there's no
the
such
appeal.
decision,
I
there's
don't
no
think
such
there was
decision.
anything
There's
besides
no
that.
such decision in the
That's
meeting.
what I heard, and.
That's what you
that's-
heard.
And that's what the attorney apparently
Okay.
heard.
Now,
and
please
that's-
don't interrupt me.
So Carrie has her hand up, she has
No,
no chance.
I actually had not yielded the floor. I was interrupted for a point of order, for which I yielded.
Point of order, 10 minutes, 10 minutes.
There's no limit of 10 minutes.
Why don't you read the rules, Peter? You're citing the rules to Susan. Now listen, one of the most important things we need to do tonight is to be thoughtful and respectful and listen to the issues. You have now spoken for 25 minutes.
Point of order. Would you please instruct Ms. Manning not to interrupt me?
Point of order, 10 minutes. Look it up.
Jennifer?
Yeah.
Am I limited to 10 minutes? This board has never enforced such a rule, and I would ask that it not be enforced.
It's
For this,
enforceable if it's requested.
at this moment.
Look under
I have a
rules.
few more comments then.
Please stop for a moment.
Sure.
Yeah. Susan, generally, we've given everyone the opportunity to go through their list of items. I appreciate the timeliness, okay? So if I'm gonna respect one person going on, then I've gotta respect everybody going on.
Okay.
And that is generally what you all tell me you want to do. If you want me to time people, I'm happy to do so. I'm capable of doing that. I think what happens for me is if you get repetitious, I'm gonna ask you to move on. If it's fresh, if it's new, if it's a new insight, then we need to have it heard.
Okay, and then can you make sure that all the other board members have an opportunity to
Yes,
speak?
I am continually making eye
Very
contact,
good.
and
Okay.
if you don't look at me or indicate that you wish to speak, I'll try and call on you.
I'm just
Yes.
waiting my turn.
So at this moment,
I'm not gonna get it tonight.
Thank you.
okay, so my understanding
I'll
is.
finish up in a moment.
If I may.
Sure.
Peter has the floor, Carrie wishes to speak, and then you wish to speak? Am I good?
I'm gonna wait until everybody else has had an opportunity. I think that's only fair.
Thank you.
Well, as I said, I think there's two issues. I would not object to this book. I believe we should be reviewing the matter. I would not object, if I didn't think that there was an issue with the process. I would also have a hard time objecting at this point. But it's come to us, we're the intersection with the community, we're here to represent the community, and I think the discussion of the impact of this book on our African American students is perfectly appropriate for us to discuss and take this into consideration. And that, I think, is also a failing in the process, because I was at those committee meetings, and I don't recall hearing a significant discussion of impact on African American students of this book, of these issues, of the hurdles, of the N-word, from the point of view of an African American student, which is what some of the things I've heard from objections from both parents and students in our district. No, stop now. Thank you.
Ready. Last time the board met, I asked to clarify our role, and in reading the notes that our attorney prepared for us tonight, I see that we're here tonight because we are reviewing an appeal of the committee's decision, which I took to understand the decision on whether or not to remove the book, not whether or not they followed the process as it was outlined in policy. So I had a different understanding coming here tonight than what you articulated, Susan. And I came here tonight prepared to advocate for the reasons that I believe it's appropriate for us to remove the book from the curriculum. I sent a letter to our English department to give them a heads up that this is what I would be sharing tonight, because I have very much enjoyed my time being of service on the board, and it is not lost on me the weight that this will leave as my last board meeting. And I feel badly about our teaching staff, and I have high respect for our teachers, including Kelly Sullivan, who spoke here tonight. But I've decided not to hide behind the dodge that our board role is only to confirm the process was followed. So that's where I landed on that. That's where I landed on that after thinking about what our board role was and what we were being asked to do when we came here tonight. So I sent a response to our letter that the board members received from the English department. And this is what I sent them. Dear colleagues, thank you for your thoughtful letter. I am wrestling with the discrepancy between advising teachers to, quote, refrain from speaking the N-word in class, end quote, while advocating that the language in this book is entirely appropriate. My 9th grade son mentioned that during his class, his English teacher substitutes the phrase black person when the N-word appears in the TKAM text. I am uncertain whether that practice is potentially causing harm. I'm also struggling with the uncontested facts that in Wisconsin, underrepresented populations suffer enormous health disparities and achievement gaps. I recognize that our time-honored traditions and cultural norms in classrooms, healthcare facilities, and our legal system are not producing good results for racial minorities. That's why I am especially interested in seizing opportunities to improve these conditions in our community. When we have an issue brought to the attention of the school board that harm is potentially being caused, it is hard for me to accept counter-arguments that defend and justify perpetuating the current actions or protocols. Of course, there have been plenty of times that established, highly respected professionals changed their minds about what they believed to be correct when they discovered it wasn't. I wholeheartedly support the professionalism of our educators. This does not mean that I believe a decision made by the English department faculty is untouchable or unchangeable by others in the district who are charged with oversight responsibilities. Further, I believe it is possible to disagree with a particular position without exaggerating that one point of disagreement to be construed as wholesale disregard for teacher professionalism. I'm worried that the argument put forth in your letter implies an exaggeration such as that, which is not warranted no matter what is decided during the board review of the TKAM appeal. Your letter inspired me to write back directly, in particular because April 11th is the final meeting of my school board tenure. It's been a privilege to serve on the Board of Education, and I regret ending with what may be an unpopular position on this controversial topic. I hope it does not cast aside our many other collaborative accomplishments over the past 3 years to move the district forward. I really felt it was important to share my thoughts in that way with our English colleagues in that department before coming here tonight, because I have a personal conviction that my service on the board has afforded me very few opportunities to work on the work of the district with the achievement gap. That is just not something we get to. We spend a lot of time quibbling about an order of our agenda items and who gets how much time to speak. And I feel like I have not been able to contribute in our district to moving us forward on this very topic, and if this is the only opportunity I have, I'm gonna take it. So I came here tonight prepared to vote to remove this book, to send a signal that we need to be doing more work on this topic, in addition to all the strong work that many, many people are already doing. This is not to negate the fact that people in the district have equity and social justice very high on their priorities. I feel really confident that our strategic priorities truly reflect what we've committed to doing. I just feel like where I landed on this is I can find a role for the board in this that I think is appropriate, that I listened to what our attorney advised us, and that's just where I landed. So I'm prepared tonight to vote against the motion that you just put out, Susan. I'm sorry we didn't talk first, because now we have to maybe have a vote on that motion and see how we're gonna proceed. But I'm prepared to not uphold the English department recommendation in the committee review, and instead, our attorney advised us that if we were to proceed with making a motion tonight, that motion also requires us to include a reason for why this book, let me review the charge to us, which was to remove the book. The policy provides any board action to remove material will be accompanied by the board's statement of its reasons for the removal. So if a board member wants to make a motion to remove the material, they must include a reason or reasons for removal. And we're not there yet because we have a motion on the floor, and I've learned enough to understand process. I'm just mentioning for our group that should this proceed and the motion on the floor doesn't pass, and we have another opportunity, I am prepared to make a motion, and I have a reason in mind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Finally, you know the process.
Took me 3 years.
Other voices?
I'll go after you if you wanna. But because if we're gonna open the door, then I'm gonna make my other comments, which I wasn't gonna make, but I'll make them now, but I'll let Jeff go first.
I wrote them down because I didn't want to forget what I had to say, so. Thank you all for being here. I truly believe that discussions like this are important for everyone. I think it takes being uncomfortable to grow. I also think it's very important to start with an understanding that we're all on the same team and we all want the same thing. I think that has gotten lost in some of this discussion. The thing we want is obviously is to give our children, all of our children, the best education possible. And I believe it's important that we do not assume intent for anyone. Understand that the very nature of policy is that people interpret them differently. As we see here, we've had 3 different board members interpret one thing completely different. So it does not mean if someone interprets a policy different than you that they are lying. They just are seeing the world in a different way. I also need to stop here and say a word about our English department. I empathize with you in making this complaint because I know as a district, we have a long ways to go in terms of equity and how we are reaching our children of color. Hopefully we've made some strides towards improving that tonight, but I don't think it's fair that what we put on our English department. That being said, it's not being fair to our English department to say that they do not have the skill set to handle these tough discussions or are not mature enough, etc. A few years ago, Colleen Kerr went to the media and said the social workers at Senate Middle School did not know how to work with the black boys in the school. This is the only middle school in the district that had 2 social workers, and me being married to one, I knew how incredibly far off and ignorant his statement was. He had no idea what was happening on a daily, weekly, monthly, or by-minute basis, but he made his claims based on a day's worth of test scores and a truckload of ego. Well, I'm not here to litigate that instance. I use it as an example to be careful making claims on what someone can or cannot do on their job. We do not know anyone else's story. While everyone has not experienced some degree of the same, or even the same degree of racism, there is a good chance that we have all felt those same emotions, and we can all empathize with each other. I think we have a great group of highly skilled teachers, and I'm pretty sure they would all say that they are very comfortable having these tough discussions, and I'm certain they would also say that they are better at teaching this book now than they were 3 years ago. And one thing I have learned is that you do not know what you do not know. And while I have worked very hard these last few years to increase my understanding of other cultures, I know I have miles and miles yet to go. I also know I will be further along in a year than I am now. And it's a perpetual process of constantly improving, and I know that our staff is constantly working to be more culturally relevant. That also falls on our shoulders to make sure that we have these opportunities to continue this understanding. I also do not think it is fair to sit in a meeting and say, teach me how you would teach the kids. As a former classroom teacher and trainer, I know that every day and every class is different. You have an outline, but every day goes differently, playing off energy, curiousness, cooperation of the class that hour. Like anything that is done right, it takes some warm-up to get the feel of what you are working with and who you are working with each day. So, I'm also extremely disappointed that this issue has come to this point in front of us, but here we are. It's hard to ask our children to be able to rationally discuss things and come to a compromise solution if we cannot model that for them. That all being said, it's time to address the book. While reading it, I am not overly impressed with the book itself. It's way too archaic for my taste, and not just the continuing use of the N-word, but silly things like no boys can cook or women only should wear dresses. I'm a pretty good cook myself here, but I realize this fits into the time period, but unfortunately we know we are still in that time period in many ways. Tomorrow, read, which I don't recommend reading, but read the comments online of the story our friends at the Wisconsin State Journal write about tonight's meeting, and it will make Mockingbird seem like a children's book. No need to fuel that fire. I also think that the white savior story is as outdated as a princess needing the prince to slay the dragon for a story to be told. I am certain that there is no evil, harassing, bullying intent when teaching this book by our English teachers, but I also understand the difference between intent and impact. While the intent is pure, the impact is obviously, as we can tell by our turnout tonight, that not what was intended. I also see your point about the bullying harassment. If a student says the N-word 48 times, he or she would be rightfully disciplined. So why does Harper Lee get a free pass? I understand that there's context, but maybe a child using that word would also think they have context, and they would not. I'm also aware of saying that those who do not pay attention to history are doomed to repeat it. Well, if anyone paid attention to the last election, that ship has sailed. But seriously, I agree with the statement that there's lots and lots of history we ignore, whitewash, and do not teach, despite its importance to our nation and the birth of our nation. I know that by policy we do have a say in curriculum, but I do not want to tell the English department what to teach. My recommendation would be like what we've heard before, that they move it to the recommended list and off the mandatory reading list. However, that would mean, if they do decide to add a new book, that we as a district, and I think this is incredibly important, compensate them for their planning time and make sure they have all the books and materials they need to teach a different book. It's not an easy process to switch out a chunk of their curriculum. I understand that. One thing in the Comida's complaint against the district that really stood out to me was this on page 8. Due to quantities of titles available, teachers usually offer approximately 9 titles based on class interest. I find it disconcerting that we would ever not have the resources to buy any book that we are teaching in any quantity needed. I understand that money is not unlimited, but it seems to me that in a list of paying priorities, it would be number 1 the teachers and number 2 books, being a school district. I respect everyone's opinion in this room. I feel that we can all learn from each other instead of being a northbound Zax who runs into the southbound Zax, and we all dig at our heels and the world evolves around us. As Martin Luther King Jr. said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are all in this together and we are all connected. So let's make sure in the future and tonight that we are leading the change and evolution of our community and our education together. I think we have a lot that we can all learn from each other, and let's take a page from our amazing group of Cottage Grove, Forever Friends, and do just that.
Thank you. Thank you. Susan?
Take another stab. I think that, I mean, everybody, you guys have raised good points too. I think To Kill a Mockingbird can be an effective vehicle to address some of these things. I mean, clearly we heard tonight about young children being called the N-word. I've had that reported to me as well in our elementary schools. This is not the first time they hear that word. It needs to be talked about. The pain of it needs to be talked about. The weaponization of language needs to be talked about. And I think that I talked to my youngest son who graduated in 2003, and he loved this book, and I talked to him about it, and he said, when I was talking about how I thought it needed to be taught, he said, well, just so you know, it wasn't taught that way when I was in school. That was 2003. Since then, we have made a real effort to have our teachers attend the White Privilege Conference 3 years in a row. I was lucky to be able to attend it 2 years. We had, I think, close to 50 people attended it when it was here in Madison. We've done beyond diversity training. You know, we've offered a lot of professional development. We've also had some staff turnover, so it's not something we can't rest our laurels on it. It's a continuing, ongoing work in progress, and we also know that it takes some people longer to adapt, to get into that, to pick up what they need to pick up from that. But I think I feel like it's a mistake to look at this book as narrowly as I've heard it described tonight. The point of the book isn't to talk about the Black experience. The point it's written by a white author about her experience as a child growing up in the South, and the Black characters, that's a huge part of it. Obviously the racism is a part of it, but it's her awakening understanding of racism is a big part of it. Atticus, yeah, I mean, he is, I have an issue with that, the white savior thing too, but I don't think this should be the only book that they read. I think there should be other books read by people of color to counteract those images, and I think those facts should be talked about in class. I I mean, why is it that this book that was written about 1960, I believe, that about a society in 1933, why do you think the black characters were so one-dimensional? How would that book be maybe written today if you were telling a similar story? I don't think you have to look at Go Set a Watchman to see racism in Atticus. I think Atticus was a racist, and I think you can talk about that. To me, that's something that should be talked about. He wasn't just a great white savior. There are a lot of comments he makes in the book where I think, well, wait a minute. I mean, and I think those are things that should be addressed, because it isn't only in that book that they run into those kinds of things. I think, the letter we got from the National Coalition Against Censorship, Kids' Right to Read project, pointed out that the opportunities provided by To Kill a Mockingbird in engaging students with works, and I'm quoting them now, works that may create discomfort in order to glean a more complex understanding not only of history but also of present-day society, to critically examine the racist ideas that permeated Mockingbird's Macomb community and openly discuss how some of these ideas still plague American society today, and to challenge students to think critically about its resonance with modern society. What about the adequacy or inadequacy of Atticus's moralism in terms of walking in another person's shoes, given their lack of experience in our racially and economically segregated society? Can you really expect them to walk in their shoes? I mean, is that too glib? What are the changes that have taken place in the courts and the criminal justice system since then, and what are the remaining huge problems? The whole the school to prison thing that gets talked about so much, and the way over the extremely high overrepresentation of minorities in our prisons is something that I think kids need to be thinking about, and I think, to me, this opens up that possibility. I think that I found the rationale provided by our teachers in our English department to be very solid. I also agree with the points in the letter made in another letter we received from the Office for Intellectual Freedom and the American Library Association, that the school district should rely on the professional judgment of its teachers and administrators who have read and studied literature and pedagogy to determine what books best meet the educational mission of the school district and the needs of students. And note that this point, in fact, is articulated in our own policy 2521, which says that it is our professional staff that selects books. So I believe that, again, an overlooked part of the committee's decision was that we encouraged the English department to go back, and my understanding is they're going to be given some summer workshop time, to go back and review this book. I think they ought to review, I believe, Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn is still taught at a later grade level. That's got to have some of the same issues, and I think that there has to be an ongoing conversation about that, and I absolutely think it needs to align with some of the conversations that go on in the social studies class. Again, this 9th grade social studies class starts off with that, about race as kind of an artificial construct in the first place, but they talk about the history of it. And as far as the lack of reality and some of the things not being real, I mean, this is a novel, and it can't be all things to all people. And I think authors do make use of literary or poetic license. In The Underground Railroad, for example, by Colson Whitehead, the Underground Railroad is not just a metaphor, but rather it's a real system of trains, tracks, and tunnels with engineers and conductors. A reader would not use that point to argue against the accuracy and the horrors of slavery and the absolute terror that accompanied attempts to escape, as portrayed in this highly acclaimed, and I have to say very painful to read, novel. This is a story, again, about a white woman's childhood and her experience with racism in her community viewed through her lens. That doesn't make it any less valid a book. I think we got to be careful about what we think this book is going to do. This is one book. We read William Shakespeare, we read Charles Dickens in our high school classes. It might be hard for kids to connect to some of that, too. I was just talking about that with my husband tonight. I find it hard to read Shakespeare. I like to see the plays, and I like to listen to it, because it's hard. But I appreciate knowing about it. I do believe part of the mission of public schools is the transmission of Western culture, I think, and beyond. But I think that's a piece of it, and that's why those books are in the curriculum. So I think, yeah, this book's been there a long time. Yeah, the question should be asked, but I don't believe as a board we should reverse the committee's decision, which was to have the teachers make the decision and review it. They need to. It's nice to hear these suggestions of books, and they might be wise to, find out get some of those titles from you. But I think that is not our decision to make what books they should read. I'm kind of making a list because I'd like to read some of those too. But I know I'm gonna start repeating myself, so I guess I have to address a couple other things. One is, I don't believe our teachers instruct the kids to just get over hearing the N-word. I just, that may have happened, if that happened once or twice. I don't think that's, when they're teaching it thoughtfully, that is not how they set the context for this book. That is not my understanding of how this book is handled, or the N-word in a Langston Hughes poem, or in any other, work that they may read. I think the other thing is that the opt-out policy, that's not the answer to this particular issue, but the opt-out policy is an important policy to retain because there may be any number of books that people might object to for other reasons. It doesn't get used real often, but you've got to have that in there for parents to have that choice for their own child. I think that's an important policy to keep. I don't think you should interpret that policy as an answer to this issue. And I think that's all for now. Sorry, I just want to make sure I got everything in here. I'm certainly well aware of the achievement gap, or the opportunity gap, I think, is maybe a more appropriate term. That's not going to be addressed by one book either, but it might be helped by a lot of other things, not necessarily related to this book. I do think the context is extremely important. The training for teaching the book is extremely important. How the book is taught is extremely important. And I think that's something we have to continue to work on. And I guess I'll stop for now. Thanks.
Thank you. Susan?
Again, there've been a lot of sleepless nights about this. And actually, it's interesting that Jeff talked about a particular individual, because I actually went to his wife, Lisa Payton, here, and asked her opinion on this. I also went to I was at the Women's Health Advocacy Workshop, and we talked about a lot of things, and there were a lot of great representatives from the east side of town where I grew up. And every single one said, you don't have the guts to keep this book and help the children learn about this? And I said, I'm not sure that I do. I'm not sure that I do. This is really difficult. And if you think that sitting up here, because I'm white, I haven't been called a nigger lover, then you're mistaken. Let me tell you, my parents were only children growing up in Louisiana. When I was 3 years old, we were spending our summers in Louisiana in a very different environment than where I lived, where my father was a cardiologist at the University Hospital. It was a challenge to me to face this. I tried to sit in the balcony in a movie theater, and they told me I wasn't allowed to sit in the balcony and watch the movie from the balcony. I had never experienced a life like this. So it can go both ways, depending upon where you are and who you're with and who you admire and you respect and you spend time with. And to the point of being a board member, other than who I am, I was an English lit major and I read a lot of tough books at Beloit College. And if you know Charlie Ellis, he was a great role model for many of us there. And learning and understanding what were good things to read and understand. As a tenure board member, I seriously reviewed the policies, procedures, and statutes in relation to the board role, specifically in relation to this issue. It's great to personally have a feel about what you would like to do here, but that's not what we're elected to do. We're elected to follow the statutes, the board policies and the rules that govern what we do today. And that's why we try and have board norms about behavior, in case you didn't notice. We aren't all supportive of that either. But I seriously reviewed all of this material and determining whether or not, as a board member, we should be making a specific determination in relation to a specific item in curriculum. And it did not appear that a determination of items, specific items to be included or not included in the English curriculum was a clear part of our board governance role. It appeared that, as I reviewed this material, and other people may review it differently, that making that decision oversteps our bounds, and that in determining our board position, in support or non-support of the committee decision, it's important to clearly understand the committee's position. So let me read it to you again. The committee voted 4-1 to keep To Kill a Mockingbird in the English 9 curriculum. Does that say required? Does that say required reading to you? I'm not reading it. It says to keep it in the curriculum. Then it said, the committee recommended that the English teachers carefully consider this book's place in the curriculum. So those guys sitting back there know that they are now required to go back and review this. And if you think the social studies teachers aren't involved in this decision, you're wrong, because we're getting email from them as well about this issue. They have to review the place in the curriculum, the context in which it is taught, other equivalent options, or other ways to use the book that might include using a choice then as required text. And I expect them to come back to the board and tell me what their decisions are on those 4 items. And the tough thing about this is, that's supposed to be their expertise. They're licensed and they're trained. And it's a tough place to put it. But they're the ones who should be making this decision in relation to the law, in relation to the board law. It's tough.
I think at this point, I would like to make just a few brief statements so that my fellow board members know where I'm at. I will support the committee's decision, and everyone knows I was on that committee, so that's not a secret. I am trained as an English teacher. I'm currently teaching in a high school. I'm currently teaching Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man to 2 classrooms full of white children. I just mentioned that, so I think about these questions perpetually. There is a reading and literary theorist, Louise Rosenblatt, who talks about that an author generates a text and that a reader engages with that text. And once it's left the author's hands, it's totally up to the reader to decide, to engage, to interpret, to respond, to take in or reject. I absolutely believe that one of our jobs as literacy educators is to empower our students to find their voice. And one of the ways we do that is by reading other people's voices. It is not the case that I think To Kill a Mockingbird is the only text a child should ever read. Not at all. I do feel as a board member it is my duty to carry out board policy and to judge our decisions, criteria, evidence, conversation, etc. And at this point I also want to say all of these comments have been also swimming in my own mind and my own reading. When push comes to shove, I end up in a place where I believe essentially I need to support my educators, because John Hattie and other researchers tell us that the most powerful thing in a classroom is that teacher, that biological human DNA that's interacting with your children. And I want to make sure that those folks are making the most informed, culturally sensitive and relevant decisions. And so as a board member, I see my duty to empower the people we have hired to care for your children, to educate your children, to make the best decisions possible. And in a odd way, I want to thank the Comida family for setting this thing on fire and for taking us to a pitch of conversation. Those conversations have been happening for a very long time. But I think whether I like it or not, you have forced us to really push and shove and think about what it is that we want to do. I don't want to tell my English teachers what they can and cannot do. I want to empower them to make those informed decisions, and then we are the oversight. But if I cannot trust them to make these changes with support, with money, with access, with resources, that's a larger issue for me. So at this time, I support the committee's decision. I do not want to see the title removed from our curriculum. I absolutely want to see the considerations that are the additional portion of that decision. I want to see those fulfilled, and that's our duty, is to make sure that those things happen, that the support is there, the resources are there, and that multiple voices are brought to the fore. And I want all of these voices to continue in this conversation. That would be the best outcome, and there's no policy that says that has to happen, but I absolutely, that would be my wish, if I got to have a wish, but I have to decide on policy, so. Thank you. Yeah.
Just a brief comment. We've seen, like in the letters from the American Library Association and other folks, this sort of the lecturing about, purging uncomfortable topics from our classroom. And I just want to clarify that this is not about that. In fact, from my view, one of the flaws of this book, when I read it in 9th grade and 8th grade, was that it didn't make me uncomfortable enough. It didn't go far enough. And I would strongly encourage if we do find and ask for an alternative to this book, that we find one that addresses the issues at hand. That this is not an issue of shying away from uncomfortable or difficult topics. I think they're very important. Carrie had her hand up next.
Where I landed on this and the committee's recommendation to require the teachers to go back and review its place in the curriculum, I believe they already have done. We've received a letter from the district's department that says they are committed to teaching this book because of all the reason that it's already been established that it fits in the curriculum and upholds what we have decided we want to do. So I understand where people have commented here tonight that we could choose to follow the spirit of what that committee decided, which is the teachers are going to go back. I just personally am convinced that they will go back and continue to use the book because they've already looked at it and decided to continue using it. So that, to me, is saying we are essentially deciding to continue to have it in our curriculum. I also looked really closely at the attorney's advice to us about our procedure tonight. And in working through this, our process for tonight leads us to the last item, which is the board's decision. And A is to approve the committee's decision, or B, to remove the book the policy provides. And so we do have that in my read of this as an appropriate board action that could be taken tonight based on the advice we were given. And so I'm in disagreement with others here who have said that that's not the board role, because we have been advised that there is an acceptable process by which we could take action. So that's where I landed. I'm not sure why I'm interpreting this differently than others, but that's my understanding of what we're reading.
I don't find that last point contradictory, because I think if you uphold the committee's decision, you keep the book. If you don't uphold their decision, you remove the book. So that is in fact the issue. It's all about the same thing as the committee's decision. I think that's probably all I was going to say.
Thank you.
For me, the reason I said it was had been one of my favorite books was because it did make me very uncomfortable at the time. I remember it did. And it made me think about a lot of things. I thought it was very moving and very, for me personally, very powerful. I understand that's not enough. That's a different lens that an African American would have reading the book, but it did have that impact on me. I too had grandparents lived in the South, so the other thing that caught me up was the description of the southern town, not the racism part, just the physical and geographic. That's part of the writing of that book. It's part of why the book is so well written. It's the writing, it's the kids talking. There's a lot of stuff in that book besides all this ugly stuff. So anyway, that's all. I'll quit.
Susan?
I think it's important to understand. I do not in any way believe that the letter that I received from the English department basically talks about, we have reviewed this. It is very clear, and I have faith that our superintendent and Lisa will take this recommendation to heart, and that is that they are going to consider this book's place in the curriculum, the context in which it's taught, other equivalent options, or other ways to use the book that might include using a choice. That's what's being done, and to imply that that's already occurred, I don't think is accurate, and I don't believe that that's what's happening. And I do believe if I turned to Dan and said, don't you and Lisa plan to follow through with this critical part? This is not, this decision does not say you are required to continue keeping this as required reading. That is not what it says. It basically says they voted to keep it in the curriculum and then you will do this.
So, yeah, I'd be glad to clarify it, and that is accurate. That review has not occurred. We've initiated that review. Our director of instruction has met with our high school principal and department chair to talk about that process, and that will be a priority in our summer curriculum review with the department. So, correct, it's initiated and not,
The result could very easily be an option. I mean, we don't know that. What we're doing is, we're saying, we want you to go back with your expertise in this area and make this decision. Again, we can always overturn it later, but that's what we're
that is
asking
accurate.
to do.
Yes.
The letter that I received from the English department says, we also believe that our responsibilities to the board compel us to explain our rationale for teaching To Kill a Mockingbird, which we firmly believe ought to remain an important part of the English language arts curriculum at Monona Grove High School, so that the board can make a proper and fair decision. So I took this to mean they firmly believe it ought to remain an important part of the curriculum.
It doesn't say required. Did you read
I'm
required?
only interpreting the letter that I already think that they firmly believe it ought to remain.
I didn't
So
read that as required.
when you go into something already believing something ought to remain, it would be an enormous mountain to cross to say we're reviewing its place in the curriculum. So I'm taking this in a different and probably more firmly committed stance that would make it challenging to believe that we can accept the review committee's position that we're requiring them to go back and review its place in the curriculum when they're telling me they firmly believe it ought to remain an important part. I'm landing there after having agonized about this. So I'm ready to take a vote and when others are also ready. I feel there's a motion on the floor that I'll be voting against, and if it passes, that so be it.
Do you want me to reread the motion?
Yes, yes, please, that would be great. Thank you.
I move to confirm the review committee's decision to retain To Kill a Mockingbird in the English curriculum with the recommendation of further consideration by the Monona Grove High School English Department of place and curriculum, context in which the book is taught, and possible equivalent options for the use of the book. And I can give this to you later, Joyce.
Thank you. Are we good on a voice vote?
I'd like to have a roll call vote.
Roll call
Roll
vote.
call vote, starting with Jeff, please.
Me. I guess I need to hear that again.
Okay. I move to confirm the review committee's decision to retain To Kill a Mockingbird in the English curriculum with the recommendation of further consideration by the MGL, the Monona Grove High School English Department, of place and curriculum, context in which the book is taught, and possible equivalent options for use of the book.
I'm gonna vote no.
I vote yes.
Yes.
Yes?
No.
No. Motion fails, for lack of a
Pardon?
motion, yeah, it's 3-3.
Right.
3 to 3.
3 to 3.
I'd like to
If-
make a different motion, if allowed.
Can I first, please?
He can talk.
I'm a little concerned that we're going to be at an impasse with 6 of us here.
Well, in that case, the
hang on,
committee will
I'm sorry.
understand. Okay.
And actually, we haven't taken a position on that. We haven't upheld the committee decision. There's a 7th board member, for those of you who are not familiar with us, whose dean unfortunately is in rehab tonight for his recent surgery, not for his drinking problem. And what I would suggest is that I talked to Dean earlier today, and he would be available next week. What I am going to suggest is that we postpone this work. Unfortunately, we're coming up with a board changeover. We need to finish this before our next board meeting, which is the officially scheduled board meeting, which is where we have a new board, which is the 25th. And what I'm going to suggest is we postpone this and we hold a meeting next Wednesday, where we can all be present and hopefully resolve this issue, because I do believe that we owe it to the district to have and I think in response to the complaint, we do need to have a positive response one way or the other.
I'd like to respond to that and say there's no guarantee that 7 people will be present at another night. Someone could be sick that night. So what I would like to do is have a different motion that I'd like to raise that might garner additional support. Jennifer, with your permission?
Yes, please.
I move removal of To Kill a Mockingbird as a required text in the English curriculum for the reason that the book is no longer aligned with our community values. The reason I've selected that as a reason is because it is not a commentary on the professionalism of our staff or how they're teaching it. It's that we are here as community members, and this book is no longer aligned with our community values. I feel comfortable making that motion.
I'll second that motion.
All those in favor of this motion?
roll
Discussion
call vote.
or
Dis-
roll
and-
call?
oh,
Okay.
oh, that's for discussion.
That's for discussion.
Yeah, discussion.
Yes.
Okay.
I would like to make an amendment, a friendly amendment, that we make sure that the English department, if we do decide to remove this, has all the resources they need to replace this book.
Yeah.
Without cashing out their budget for the year. That we take care of the new book that goes into the thing. However you want to word that.
That's beyond the scope of what I am prepared to, and others, if you'd like to do an amendment, Jeff, but the friendly amendment thing is, we have
You don't have to
normal
accept.
processes
You
in
don't have to
place
accept.
to
You have to say.
implement curriculum, so no.
But we really don't, though.
So
We have normal processes in
so-
place to
So
implement
no, thank you,
curriculum.
but if you choose to make an amendment, please do.
We have normal processes in place but not for a time when the board steps in and says, you need to change this book out. We don't have a process for that.
I'm
And-
reluctant to direct any other activity except to say to remove it as a required text, and there's room to interpret this motion as far as the department sees fit.
So, well, okay, then.
It upholds the other
A
spirit of the other
neutral, a
things
neutral
of going
amendment, and
back.
then that be not an unfriendly or friendly, neutral.
They could still go back and review its place in the curriculum as the committee decided. I'm removing it as a required text. That's where I wanted to draw my line.
But for them to put a new required text in takes
That's up
money
to
and
them.
time.
That's up to them.
But I don't want it to not be done because they don't have it in their budget.
That's beyond my scope in this role to know.
It's not mine. It's not, I don't think it's beyond our
We need a
scope. I think
second
it's
discussion. Right.
I thought we had a second.
Well, we do on that, but if Jeff's making an amendment, if you're actually gonna make an
Right.
amendment.
All right, I'll make an amendment that, that we make sure that they can get a new book funded by the district without the budget. That we take care, as a board, make sure that I'm trying to figure out.
That the board provide additional, that the
Board-
district provide additional funds to facilitate the selection of
Right.
alternative materials.
Correct. I'm good with that.
And we're looking for a second.
The reason I'm not gonna second that, Jeff, is in the letter we received from the English department. One of the comments that they made is that they regularly and thoroughly review curriculum, so the process that they will be conducting is no different this year than any other year. The letter attests to their ability, we review our curriculum regularly and thoroughly, we make decisions based on curriculum standards, et cetera, et cetera. They do that, and that's part of our normal process, so we're not asking above and beyond what they normally would be doing.
I've dug deeper with some English teachers and found that they wanted to switch some books out at times and didn't have the money to do it.
Point of order, there needs to be a second before we can continue to talk about the amendment, or, yeah, the amendment.
Thank you. So we have a decline from Carrie. Anyone else second? All right, amendment fails due to a lack of a second. So we're back to the motion then, initiated by Carrie, seconded by Peter.
And I would request a roll call vote.
The motion again is to move removal of To Kill a Mockingbird as a required text in the English curriculum for the reason that the book is no longer aligned with our community values.
Yes.
I'd like to make the point again that in fact could occur, or a choice on books could occur once the process directed by the committee occurs. I just want to make it very clear that that could in fact occur. And what we're doing is we're making that decision rather than referring it back to the professional staff.
I think this is the input that we're hearing the community on this, and we're understanding that it's not aligned with community values. I thought I was trying to give cover for people like me who want to continue to support our professionalism of our teachers, but also recognize our constituents and why we're elected, not by the teachers, but by the voters. So that's what I'm trying to represent and giving this as an opportunity for us to move forward here and not be deadlocked by framing this as supporting the work of the committee, who none of us want to undermine or not. And if this fails too, it's just a testament to how difficult these issues are, how much we care. We can be ridiculed in our little crappy local newspaper about our left-wing.
Careful.
She said it's okay.
I mean, I read that
Please
thing.
note that we didn't all make that.
I read it cover to cover, and I don't mean that to
Don't be crappy in the bad way.
to be as offensive as that inadvertently sounded. What I mean is, I have been offended by things written in that paper about the school board and our intent. And that's been chosen to be published in that context. So therefore, when I shorthanded that just now, it's because I think that some things go unchallenged that are published there, that are not fair to us, and the conscientiousness that we bring to this role. Having said that, I'm gonna get off my little soapbox about that and say, this is a difficult thing. I might not have been able to find a way for all of us to move forward on this in a way that both sides can feel good, but I really came in the spirit of trying to do that tonight. That's why I come to do this work. So I move removal of it as a required text for the reason the book is no longer aligned with our community values. Going once.
I believe we still have our request for a roll call vote.
Correct.
Is where we had left it.
Start with me if you want.
Let's start with the person that calls for the roll call.
No, Joyce wants us to start on the end.
Nope.
You're okay?
Yep.
All right, Ms. Fox, if you would please.
I'm sorry, me, yeah, no.
No.
Yes.
I'm gonna ask to skip over me and come back to me, please. There's a reason. You can do that.
We can.
Yes.
I'm gonna vote no. Well, I agree it should be removed. I'm not gonna leave the English teachers to stretch limited resources with some of the crazy stuff we've been spending money on lately, that if we can't throw a few $1,000s away to get a new book, then I can't agree with that.
No.
Oh, then I'm free to vote yes. I wanted to skip because in order to ask for it actually, I'm sorry, I rephrase. I vote no, and I'm doing so because I want to retain my right to ask for reconsideration. And if you want, you have to be on the majority side if you do it. I would vote yes for this, normally for this motion, but I am voting no to retain my right to ask for reconsideration.
Thank you. The motion fails.
That's right.
I'm sorry.
Again, we're at an I'm sorry. Again,
Yes,
we're at an
Peter.
impasse, and I'm gonna ask that we postpone this discussion to a time next week where we can have a meeting with everyone in attendance, if that is possible. And I'll make that as a motion if there's a second.
Could I
Yes,
just ask a
go
question,
ahead.
is that what an impasse means, that we would, I mean, you do have the right to request reconsideration, but if we failed, we reached impasse on this decision, then it seems to me my interpretation would be that the review committee's decision stands. Now, if you want to, at the next meeting, ask for reconsideration, you do have that right, but would that not be?
I'll say, I guess, my opinion, for now, the committee review, or the committee stands.
But-
However, the policy does require the board, to render a decision.
Okay.
And so I'm not so sure that the board has fulfilled its obligation in that
Exactly.
respect.
So then it's appropriate for that. So given that we did decide we wanted it to be this board, we didn't want to put this on the new incoming people, are people free next, I mean, are we sure that
Right.
Dean's gonna be available next Wednesday?
He indicated, nobody's sure, his health
Right.
is uncertain, although he says he walked 100 yards today.
Yeah.
So he was reasonably certain that he will be released and be able to make it toward the end of the week more than likely than the beginning of the week.
I'm just getting a text of the boys' basketball banquet that I missed tonight, but what I was going to do was look at my calendar to confirm whether I have a commitment or not. I just do not personally believe that postponing in the hope that 7 people who drive cars every day and do not live lives without risk
Oh, we can do it.
is a strategy forward.
I'm gonna get Dean here if I have to carry him.
Well,
No.
we will have new board members joining us, and
Yeah.
those members will be sworn in on
The 25th.
someday
So this meeting has to be next
soon.
week. is what
Right.
I'm saying.
And so when they take office, in our normal schedule, this will be a normal item of business.
And the board.
And we have the good fortune of having members here who have been highly engaged, and I'd like to thank the people who ran for office and who remain committed to staying current and up to date on the work of this board for months, because I've seen you here. I don't know why, you keep coming. So we really appreciate it. They are fully prepared to step in, and they have their own opinions, and that's why they were elected, and I'm a lame duck. So I don't have any personal problem with it rolling to the next set of people who will be doing this work, because they will be the ones to proceed then with overseeing the results, which may or may not include reviewing its place in the curriculum and demanding a response in a timely way to that. Doesn't bother me.
Okay.
Thank you for your position on that. I do not see myself as a lame duck. You're welcome to go there if you need to. I'm currently in office until others are sworn in, and if we have duties to perform, we need to perform them. At this time, I don't know if we want to consult with legal counsel, if we want to set a date. What would be our best
Well,
step forward?
it'd be setting a special meeting,
Yeah.
okay, and so, certainly the president has the authority to schedule a special meeting. We certainly would wanna consult, and honestly, we wouldn't wanna hold that meeting unless we knew that we'd have 7 board members present. So, I don't know that it has to be decided now. We don't know the availability of our 7th board member, but I guess my thought would be that we take that into consideration and continue.
I would like to amend my motion.
Okay.
That we postpone this until time to be determined by the board president.
With consultation.
You know, we could Skype,
Oh, I thought there was.
we could Skype
I don't
Dean
think
in.
we-
if he
I don't
can.
That's
I
not,
don't
Dean
think we
won't be the
have a
issue.
motion.
Question is, will
But
everybody
we're
else be able to
just-
make it?
I can make it.
Okay.
What's the date?
Well,
We-
we were
It's
waiting
yet
to
to
see,
be
I mean,
determined.
I'm clear
Yeah.
Wednesday
Board
through
president.
Friday of next week, but
So am
that's
I.
just me. The following week's gonna be more of a problem.
Yeah.
With the speediest of,
Wednesday is the MGA.
Wednesday is the new board, so it has to be next week if it's this
Correct.
board. So my
Yeah.
preference would be for it to be next week, and if Dean can make it.
Yep.
all right.
So I think we'll make sure we individually contact
Yep.
each board member.
Yep.
Okay.
I don't know, nobody seconded it.
Well, there wasn't,
But
was
we
there,
can-
I never
Can
heard
you
a clear
put- yeah,
motion. I never-
But of course, if you just
The
wanna.
motion of
Do we need a motion?
reconsideration,
We can
or,
just-
I thought.
No, I'm not asking,
Yeah,
I'm asking for a motion to postpone,
Thank you.
um,
Do we have a
the
second on the?
consideration of the issue.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Do we have a second on the motion to postpone?
I'll second.
Oh, I see.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All in favor, please say aye.
I'm not asking for your.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
Nay, I would have rather we decided it tonight.
Thank you. The motion carries. All right, we will be in contact.
How are we gonna, you're gonna?
We will be contacting you as soon
About dates,
as.
and people, please watch your emails and get back to
Yes.
us
Well,
promptly.
we can talk about our calendars when we get to future meetings at the end of
Yes,
this.
thank you.
All right, well.
Thank you, everybody.
Yep,
That
thank you
was-
for coming.
I want to thank everybody who
Thank
came
you.
and participated and for your thoughtful comments.
Thank you.
It's been a while since we've had this kind of a crowd. I appreciate it. Can we take a break?
Let's please take a 5. Can we do a 5?
We can do 5.
Five's
All
good.
right, let's do a 5. Please stretch, do what you gotta do, and then let's come on back.
All right.
Good evening, everyone. The board is now back in session after a short break. We are going to pick up with our administrative reports and the superintendent report with Dan Olson.
Okay, and I apologize, I just posted this late, but it's just a reminder of, with regard to the facility community survey, and I wanted to give you some updated numbers today as far as responses. We've had an excellent response rate thus far. It got out in the mailboxes last weekend, and we have had a total of 685 responses. Of those, 508 are community members, 177 are school employees. And so, again, that's just a week into it. The survey is open until April 30th. We'll be sending out reminders to those that we can electronically, staff and parents. And then, and I just, added on today the reminder of the dates that we have for the board, the process for the board review and so on.
I've personally received positive feedback about the quality of the survey. People were very happy with what they received.
Right.
How many did we send out?
Every household. Do you know?
About 10,000. We should have gotten it, right?
I got it.
That's my guess.
Look in your mail, it doesn't come forward, it comes like this.
I know, I haven't
Okay.
gotten it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
So you,
not
like
received.
87.
Okay.
So you broke it,
I like
down
I got
to
it.
community members and
So it was when you were
staff.
out of town.
But
I need more cake.
there's an intersection there of a lot of.
Oh, yeah, and when, that was just a quick, but we'll be able to break, and we get the final results a number of different ways. Residents, non-parents.
I mean, I still think that if you're a teacher in our district and don't live here, you're fine answering the survey. I just know that there's an intersection there. And I don't-
Absolutely, and those numbers I gave you do not include that. That's
Okay.
correct. Yeah. So you're right, of those 177 employees, many of those may also be residents. I didn't check that. Yeah.
Is there a way to?
Yes, yeah, so when you get the final results, you will have that data.
Is there a park there? I guess there is, right? I took it a while ago. So I don't remember the initial questions that tell you who you are. I don't remember.
There's some demographic things, age, residency, and so on.
Yeah, but they have kids in school.
Yeah. So,
Carrie didn't get a piece of their own cake.
Aw.
Thank you very much.
All right,
Got your
anything
corn.
further for the superintendent?
Thank you.
All right, that takes us to board reports, starting with a policy committee report from Susan Fox.
Okay, so the policy committee met on Monday, April 9, to review the final policy and the Neola updates from 2017, and also to follow up on concerns raised by a parent at 2 board meetings related to middle and high school athletic teams, given that there seemed to be some board interest in that topic. The Neola update policy reviewed is 5330, administration of medication emergency care. Our school nurses had reviewed this policy, recommended some non-substantive changes involving language placement, and that policy was approved as amended, and will be coming forward at probably the next board meeting for our first reading. With regard to the extracurricular and curricular-related activities, we looked at both policies 2430 and 2431 as references for discussion on interscholastic sports. The committee discussed these concerns with input, because in attendance were activities director Jeff Schreiner, high school principal Paul Brost, and superintendent Dan Olson. There were no administrative nor committee recommendations for any policy changes, but in light of the increasing numbers of participants that we're seeing at GDS, Superintendent Olson will have discussion with the middle school athletic director and the new principal about the philosophy of middle school interscholastic sports, review the current program, and determine whether different options are appropriate. The administrative recommendation after committee discussion was to continue the current practice at the high school, whereby coaches basically determine the team rosters and overall numbers of teams are reviewed annually based on numbers of kids coming out and capacity and that kind of thing. Our next meeting will be Thursday, April 26th at 9 a.m.
All right, thank you.
And policies do continue to us, so,
Yep.
our committees do. Go ahead.
Okay, anything further for policy committee? All right, that takes us to the second report. Hi, Susan Fox, legislative liaison.
Well, and actually, this was hard to even know what to report on because there's so much, so I'm just gonna highlight a couple things. One bill that's awaiting governor's signature, and you might have already seen this, is the nomination papers in the second-class city issue. As you're aware, because there's a small sliver of Madison within the Monona Grove School District, we are required to get 100 signatures to run for the board. This recently was an issue in North Fond du Lac when the city of Fond du Lac annexed part of it, and people didn't know it, and they signed up and thought they didn't get enough names, so then they couldn't be on the ballot. It was created all kinds of problems. So this bill, if the governor signs it, will exempt districts in which less than 10% of the school district's territory is contained within a second-class city. It permits the annual meeting or the school board to adopt a resolution to reduce the number of signatures required on nomination papers submitted to not less than 20 and not more than 100. So you could settle on something less than, or not. School safety bill, we learned a little bit about last night, the school safety grants, there's gonna be more coming on that. As usual, they thread in there that we're required to submit blueprints, but they don't know exactly what that means. That's being determined, so there's still a lot of stuff up in the air. And you guys get the WSB things, those were the more interesting things, I thought. You have another one?
Do you know if the legislation governing the signatures on the nomination papers also covers the related issues with the annual meeting? There's like 500 signatures to put an issue at the annual meeting and so on, and it's also governed by the same problem.
I don't believe it does. I think this was simply about board, because of that issue that came up in North Fond du Lac, it was just related to candidates.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, I raised this issue several years ago with Rob, and I mean, it hasn't had any motion. It's interesting to see it's got motion now.
Yeah, we'll see. So we'll see where it goes. The governor's not signed it yet, though, so. And he has signed some other things. So.
Anything further for our legislative liaison? All right, thank you. That then takes us to our possible action items, one of which we have already addressed. And the remaining action item is a contract for the Glacial Drumlin School Principal.
I'd like to move approval of the contract for the Glacial Drumlin School Principal as presented, and I'd like to give Dan the opportunity to say more about it. Do I have to say anything else from the motion?
After we second it, somebody says.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you.
I don't want to say anything else if you have.
Okay.
Sure. And the contract we're asking for approval is for Chris Langer to be the new Glacial Drumlin School Principal. Chris is with us here in attendance tonight. Chris is currently Associate Principal at our high school.
All right.
Yeah,
any further discussion?
Yeah.
I think we all those in favor of approving this contract, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. This contract has been approved. All right.
Okay,
All right, now we can clap. All right. We currently do not have any discussion items before us.
Really?
But we do have future meeting dates. And then we will be reconvening into closed session, so.
Oh yeah, I forgot that part.
Do you wanna say something about the April 16th?
Yeah, so right now we have Personnel Committee scheduled for April 16th. And so I think, depending on the availability of Dean, we're gonna recommend that we postpone that. And we do have another one scheduled the following week right away on the 23rd. So we'll keep in communication with you as committee members, but we'll get that resolved before the end of the week.
So should we take the 16th off the schedule?
I'd like to confirm that Dean's not available. I don't think he's going to be. If by chance he is, so definitely let you know before the end of the week.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't think. Yeah, I don't think he may be available for a meeting, but asking him to lead the personnel committee.
Yeah. So I'm actually going to recommend, but I'd like to talk to him first before I actually cancel it. So, if possible.
All right. Anything further on dates or calendar at this time? All right. Then I believe we need a new motion to reconvene into closed session. Is that accurate?
And we can read it the way it's read here, the way it's stated here, read the whole thing, pardon?
No, you can read the short version.
We can, okay.
You can read,
So, I make that motion. I move that we reconvene into closed session for agenda item C for completion of consideration of enumerated subjects of business.
Thank you. We're looking for a second.
second.
Thank you. All those in favor of moving into closed session, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, campers.
We have to do a roll call.
Oh, roll call again. Let's do roll call, Jeff.
Oh, you start again?
Yes.
Oh, right. Aye.
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 All right.
All right, so now
Thank you.
we'll find
We
out-
can
We
do
don't wanna
this.
get you in trouble.
I just
We
thought.
can do this. Yeah, that's, well,
The TV cameras.
yeah. Thank you, though. All right.